I'd passed through the nearest real town, Crediton. That place simply reeked of sheep. Not that the poor fellow on the ground would have cared. Not now. He was sprawled out, the back of his head stove in, the blood clotted on the ground beside his head. When I moved round to get a closer look, it was enough to make me blench. Someone had sent a herd of cattle to trample his features. Or so it seemed. His nose was mashed, his temple crushed, and a bloody slice had been torn from his cheek. One arm reached out before him, as though pleading. The other was under his body, his legs crossed at the ankles, like the knights in my church who had been on pilgrimage. He was definitely dead. I watched, rather glumly, as a pair of wealthy-looking men appeared, one short and fat, the other taller and slender as a willow. The latter stared at the corpse with a face twisted into a sneer. The fatter man looked wary and rather nervous. With them was a priest who peered down at the dead body like a judge viewing a guilty felon. Behind them, the bailiff stood in an approximation of attention. His sagging belly and dewlap made him more a figure of ridicule than a terrifying officer of the law. And then there was an interruption. A slim, rather gaunt woman in a threadbare shift and cot, dark hair straying from beneath her coif, shoved the merchants from her path and stood staring down at the body. With a scream, she flung herself onto the corpse and rolled there in the filth, shrieking and pawing at the dead man like a cat testing its claws. It was overly dramatic, I felt, but she was entitled to her display. I had little doubt that she was the man's widow. It was enough for the trio. The priest made a perfunctory sign of the cross, and then all three made their way along the passage, a henchman or two with them pushing other onlookers from their path. When the trio had left, the bailiff returned to picking his nose and investigating the results with interest, like a gourmet discovering a fresh dainty, before sticking it in his mouth. A woman pulled a face at the sight and averted her gaze. I did likewise. Such manners would not have been tolerated in polite London society. However, I was many leagues from London, and heavens, didn't I feel every single mile of them. Besides, the average watchman in London would be just as uncouth. I'd seen enough of them in my time as an employed servant to the household of Lady Elizabeth Tudor. Looking away was all very well, but it brought my eyes to the figure of the dead man again. I have never liked the sight of death, and this one was a peculiarly ghastly sight. He was a scrawny fellow of some 30 summers, in clothes that had once been fashionable, but which now looked faded, scruffy, and filthy. Mind, that could have been the result of his lying in this alley, from the muck and trash that filled it. If it had been placed in one of the farmyards just outside the city's walls, I would not have been able to tell the difference. Excrement of all forms, mud, and the detritus of the city lay all about, and the body appeared to have soaked up many of the less pleasant forms of dampness. I was in Devon, in the city of Exeter. As you may have guessed, I did not like it. I was only there to make my way home by the speediest route. After some weeks festering in the hellhole that was Okehampton, very close by the ancient waste of Dartmoor, and as far from civilization and the attractions that